Our first presentation of the evening is going to be about itchy, biting outdoor bugs. As Scott mentioned, there's a lot of stuff outside that can make us itch, like poison ivy. Today, I'm going to be focused on the bugs, and that's just going to generally include things like ticks and spiders, well, not spiders, and mites and insects and the like. But we also have more presentations coming up in the series. So at 7 p.m. tonight, Kyle's going to take over and talk about some fungi, different fungi that we can see in our landscapes right now. And then next week, it's going to be all about turf. So we're going to go over turf diseases and turf insects. And then on August 3rd, it's going to be about scales and aphids and city mold, as well as tent caterpillars and webworms. And we sure hope that you guys will be able to join us. If not, as Scott mentioned, these are going to be recorded and added to the GROBigRed YouTube channel. So to jump off this presentation, we're going to start with talking about ticks. Now, I could talk about ticks for over an hour, but I'm going to keep it brief for the sake of today. But ticks are a really hot topic right now. They're really prevalent, especially if you spend a lot of time outdoors. And everyone is kind of somewhat aware that they're capable of transmitting disease agents like Lyme or Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So everybody's kind of just wary of ticks. They're not a fun thing to have. I try to keep an open mind about all of the creatures, all of the insects, but ticks are probably one of the ones that I would say I just can't deal with them. So in Nebraska, and particularly eastern Nebraska, it's going to change as you kind of grow across the state or get into other areas of the United States. But there are 3 species of tick that we primarily see. The American dog tick and the Lone Star tick are the most common ones. The American dog tick, right about now, you're going to be seeing a lot of the adults outdoors. The Lone Star tick, a lot of people run across them when they're young because they're a pretty aggressive tick. And they are often called seed ticks because sometimes if you get the really tiny ones, you'll get, 10 to 100 on you at the same time, and they're just awful. And then we have the black-legged tick also, and that is actually the one that vectors Lyme disease, but established populations of the black-legged tick, which is sometimes called the deer tick, have only been found in Douglas, Sarpy, and Saunders County here in Nebraska. That being said, if you visit one of those counties or visit another state, you could, bring a dog tick or, a deer tick back with you, but that's where the established populations have been found. There are efforts, however, to track the expanding range of ticks here in the state. For example, there's a community science program called Tick Tag Go, where if you come across a tick, you can upload it to an iNaturalist page online or contact an extension educator. And we kind of just keep track of when ticks are most abundant in Nebraska and where they're found, especially as this deer tick or the black-legged tick kind of expands its range into the state. And one thing that I always love to point out is kind of the seasonality of ticks. So tick season peaks in May and June, and this is most likely because people are spending a lot of time outdoors, they're having more encounters in these tick-conducive environments, which a lot of the time is this tall grass or these shaded areas. But it's also really important to be vigilant year-round. So this is the seasonality of a black-legged or a deer tick, and you can kind of see here, come October and November, that the adults are still around even as it's getting colder, and they're still actually going to be around throughout the winter, especially if we have kind of a mild winter and there's kind of these warm spots. You can still get ticks by spending time outdoors. So even though we see a lot of them this time of year, it's just really good to be vigilant, especially when it comes to ticks and tick-borne illness. So speaking of tick-borne illness, ticks are capable of carrying disease. Everyone talks about Lyme disease, but the truth is that there's so much more than Lyme disease out there as well. So the black-legged tick can transmit Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, I don't know how to pronounce that, babesiosis, something like that. The American dog tick, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia, as well as canine tick paralysis. So it's not just human diseases they can transmit diseases to our pets as well. And then the Lone Star tick is Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia, ehrlichiosis, starry, and the alpha-gal allergy. And if you're not familiar with the alpha-gal allergy, it's actually a red meat allergy that you can develop from getting bit by a Lone Star tick. So you get bit and you develop symptoms of just being allergic to red meat, and it's kind of a really unique disease. And I encourage, if you guys are interested, to look up a little more of it. But this slide is also really important. It just re-emphasizes how important it is to properly ID a tick if you do have one that's been attached and feeding on you or your kid or your pet. Because if you develop symptoms of a disease later, knowing the identity of the tick that bit you can help you and your doctor narrow down possible diseases. So if you know you've had this tick that's been feeding on you for 3 days and about a week later you start to get a fever, it's really good to know what that tick is because a lot of these symptoms can be similar. So it could be a rash from Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or it could be a rash from Lyme disease. But each tick can carry a different set of diseases. So that's why we always encourage ID. So how do you protect yourself from ticks? That's kind of the big question, isn't it? Well, first and foremost, you can wear protective clothing. I understand that, we don't always want to tuck our pants into our socks when we're outdoors doing stuff, but that's always an option, especially if you're going to an area that has ticks. You can wear long pants, tuck those pants into socks to prevent the ticks from climbing up your pant leg. They also make permethrin treated clothing, so you can buy the clothing that's already been treated, or they do make a spray that you can spray onto clothing. So this is different from DEET because it's a clothing spray and not a skin spray. Excuse me. But that can help prevent ticks as well. And we also encourage you to use a repellent. So research has shown that up to 30% DEET can repel ticks. Anything more than that is going to have the same effect as 30%. So 50% is going to be just as effective as 30. So that's kind of the recommendation there. And then you also need to protect your pets with a tick preventative. So this is an example of NexGard. There's lots of flea and tick preventatives out there for pets. And that's really important too, because your pet can bring in a tick and then that tick can get to you as well. After spending time outdoors, so if you suspect that you were in an area like tall grass that might have ticks, you can put your clothes in the dryer for about 30 minutes. So that heat is going to kill any ticks that were on your clothes. And then it's really, really important if you have to do any of these, the most important thing is just to do a proper tick check after you spend some time outdoors. So check yourself, check your children, check your pets. Ticks kind of like the midsection area. You can look behind the knees and the armpits, on the head. My son a few weeks ago pulled a tick out of his ear. It was kind of really alarming for him, but you need to be pretty thorough with your tick checks. And then what to do if you find a tick. So you did all you could to prevent it. Sometimes it's just not enough. And then you find a tick that's been feeding on you and is embedded. So you need to, this is recommended by the CDC, but you need to remove the ticks with fine tip tweezers and dispose of them. You can place them in alcohol, you can flush them down the toilet. You can put it in a container if you wanted to get it identified by someone. And then once again, identifying the species of tick, especially if it's been feeding for a while, is really important because the longer a tick feeds, the higher the chance of getting disease from it is. And then follow up your doctor if you develop any illness symptoms. There's a lot of gadgets out there, like tick remover gadgets, and then there's other things like burning the tick with the end of a match. Those aren't really recommended, especially the match thing, because you could always burn yourself. So just grab those fine tip tweezers or forceps and just pull it straight out. So the next group of really itchy bugs that I'm going to cover are my personal least favorite, chiggers. People can become exposed to chiggers nearly anywhere outdoors, whether it be strolling through tall grass in the park, gardening, or simply just enjoying some time in their yards. And chiggers are really hard to avoid because they're so tiny that if you have really great eyesight, you might be able to see it, but most of the time you're just going to be completely unaware that they're there. So chiggers locate their hosts by detecting carbon dioxide, so they're not unlike not unlike ticks or not unlike mosquitoes, and they climb to higher places to attach themselves to the clothing or fur of their victims. So these guys are also going to be primarily associated with that taller grass. And they particularly prefer tight clothing or constricted areas. So if you've ever gotten chigger bites, you might notice that it might be around your waistline, in your armpits, or like your sock line, any area that has kind of the snug fitting clothing. They really like those spots. And it's also important to note that chiggers actually don't burrow into the skin and they don't really take a blood meal. Instead, they crawl into where the hair follicle is and inject a salivary gland to dissolve nearby cells. So they're not really blood feeders and they're not burrowing into your skin. They're kind of just hanging out where that hair follicle is. And that salivary fluid, their saliva, is what makes their bites so dang itchy. So within a few hours, and it's kind of a delayed reaction for a lot of people, you don't know that you've been bit until you get home and start to get really itchy. These small red welts will begin to appear, and itching tends to peak about 1 to 2 days after chigger bites. And it can persist for a really long time too, for like up to a week. So this is why they are my least favorite, because I like to spend a lot of time outdoors looking for bugs, and I happen to get chiggers instead. And they can remain on the host for 3 to 5 days unless they get properly removed. So I'm going to go over what to do if you do get chigger bites. But these guys are not known to transmit any diseases. However, if you scratch a lot, you might have secondary infections and just things like that. So how to protect yourself from chiggers. If you're going to a place with tall grass or going to a place that, let's say you know that there's chiggers in your yard because you've experienced it before, you can wear loose fitting clothing. Avoid sitting on the ground, and once again, you can apply a repellent such as DEET or that permethrin clothing spray. After you spend time outside, we strongly encourage, taking a shower with hot water and scrubbing. So get those chiggers off of your skin so they don't burrow into those, get into those hair follicles. And then launder your clothes. We recommend don't rewear the clothes. I know that kind of sounds gross, but some people do it. They'll rewear their clothes after spending time outdoors. So make sure you wash the clothes in hot water, to also remove any lingering chiggers as well. Another thing you can do just to kind of prevent them in the landscape is to keep the lawn well manicured. So kind of in this picture, that's where we call kind of the chigger strike zone. So they like that tall grass, especially on the edges. So keep the lawn really well manicured. They don't like being exposed to the sun. That's why the short grass is great. And if needed, if it's really bad and it's an area where people frequent, you can use a pesticide containing the active ingredient bifenthrin. So if you are bitten by chiggers, there are over-the-counter treatments that you can use. So calamine lotion, hydrocortisone ointment, non-prescription local anesthetics, and just try to avoid the itch and scratch as much as possible. So moving on to the next group are mosquitoes, and mosquitoes are super abundant right now. And they do take blood meals, unlike chiggers. So females use these piercing, sucking mouth parts to take blood meals, and they need these blood meals in order to produce eggs. Male mosquitoes do not take blood meals. They are simply, it's kind of weird to refer to a mosquito as a pollinator, but they just they drink nectar, and so sometimes mosquitoes can be pollinators as well. But that's how they feed. They have this really long straw-like mouth part. And they're also really important because they can vector disease just like ticks can. And so in Nebraska, West Nile virus is fairly prevalent, and we can see this map of the United States where Nebraska and the Dakotas are kind of this dark black color. And so this is the incidence of West Nile virus by state, and Nebraska is kind of a hot zone for this virus. And it's not just West Nile that mosquitoes can vector. They can, depending on the species, just like the ticks, can vector a whole slew of different diseases. Not prevalent here, but malaria and Zika, and a bunch others like that as well. So how do you protect yourself from mosquitoes? Well, the best thing you can do to prevent mosquitoes in the first place is to take care of the larval breeding grounds. So dump out any stagnant water. Mosquitoes need to lay their eggs in stagnant water. That's where immature mosquitoes live, and that's really important, especially when we think about things like bird feeders or sometimes like piles of empty pots or used tires in yard. Those are like perfect mosquito breeding grounds. So it's really important to tackle the larvae because it's a lot easier to control the larvae than it is the adults. You can also try to prevent mosquitoes from getting indoors, so fix and repair windows and door screens. Avoid going outdoors during dawn and dusk because that's kind of peak mosquito time. I know a lot of these are like, how can you avoid going outdoors at these times? But that's when peak mosquito time is. You can wear light colored, loose fitting clothing. So mosquitoes prefer dark colors on people. And then most importantly, you can use effective repellents. So DEET up to 30%. There's also other approved repellents like picaridin, IR3535, and oil of lemon eucalyptus have all shown excellent repellency to mosquitoes. I know that there's some hesitancy among people about wearing DEET on their skin, but things go through rigorous testing, and the consensus is that any risk with DEET is extremely minimal compared to the risk of getting mosquito-borne illness. So what to do if you're bitten by a mosquito? Well, the best thing you can do is just resist the itch. You can also use over-the-counter anti-itch treatments, but really there's not much else to do. I did see the other day that there's like this little suction gadget that probably doesn't work, but it was kind of weird looking. I forgot what it was called, but just the best thing you can do is just resist the itch. It's the saliva that causes the itching, just like with the chiggers, but unfortunately, there's not much you can do beyond that. So let me just check time real quick. Perfect. So then this last group of biters is called the minute pirate bug. And this time of year into August, these are going to be big and they're very annoying. But are they beneficial or are they a nuisance? Well, it depends on the situation because in our landscapes on plants, they're predators that feed on soft-bodied invertebrates like aphids. So then we consider them beneficial because we don't want aphids on our plants. However, they can bite people in late summer, early fall when food becomes more scarce, temperatures starting to drop. However, even though they do bite, they do not feed on blood. They kind of just land on people and start probing around thinking like, hey, is this a prey item? Unfortunately, it does hurt a little bit, but there's no risk of disease. They're not taking blood meals. Yeah. And pirate bug control is just kind of impractical. I get this call a lot during the late summer, what to do about the minute pirate bugs. We don't want to spray anything because we don't want to harm these beneficial predators. Insect repellent is relatively ineffective. So DEET, how it works, it kind of confuses those insects and arachnids that are searching for carbon dioxide. Well, pirate bugs don't use carbon dioxide as a signal to find their prey. So DEET's not going to work. If you are getting bit by a lot or there's a lot landing on you, the easiest thing you can do is just squish it and, move on. And so I kind of rushed towards the end there, but I am happy to take any questions. And thank you.
Yes, one of the questions that came in, can you see in the question box? I left it up there.
Sure. Let me just bring it up here real quick. Okay, so the question was, are ticks more active at a certain time of day? Are there any recommendations for lawn products to reduce the number in our grass where the neighbor doesn't mow much? So ticks are going to be most active kind of during this hot season weather. So during the daytime, they're going to be the most active. And as far as lawn products, it's going to be kind of the same recommendation as chiggers. So you can look for pyrethroid-based products like bifenthrin. I can't think of any specific trade names right now, but just always read the label and make sure that it's labeled for ticks as well and that it's labeled for turf use.
Then there was another question. I'll just read it to you. Every time I think I've done a thorough tick check, even left all the clothes outside in the garage, I still, hours later, find a tick. Only twice have I had a tick embedded but not feed yet. If a tick is carrying a disease like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, do they transmit the disease when they attach, or do they have to actually feed to get engorged?
That is a really great question. So there's always a risk when the tick is attached, but that risk increases as the tick, so it's kind of like this curve. So the longer the tick eats, the higher your chance of disease. So the ticks aren't going to be feeding right away. They're going to be injecting that saliva, kind of getting a feel for the host before they're actually feeding. So the sooner you can get the tick off, the better your chances are.